Diana, I got your number from your resume on LinkedIn. My name is Sarah, and I'm an old student of, and like you, we had a relationship. I don't know the circumstances of your relationship with him, but it concerns me to see his behavior continued long after I knew him. I'm curious if you would be willing to talk to me about your experience. If not, I respect that.
Sarah, I am at a loss of words, but also have so much to say. Yes, I would love to talk to you about this. Were you a student in Iowa? This is Diana.
This is Sarah.
And this is Blooming After Grooming, our podcast.
If you've done any kind of research on educator sexual misconduct, you have no doubt come across the name Terri Miller. And that's because Terri has been advocating for justice for survivors of educator sexual misconduct since the 80s. The 1900s, y'all. The 1980s. Her individual advocacy work eventually led to her involvement with the National Center to Stop Educator Sexual Abuse, Misconduct, and Exploitation, or SESAME. We get into quite a bit in this episode, including Title IX, the Sesame Act, and why it's important to actually talk to people in your community and get involved. This is a great episode for really anyone, but especially perhaps those of you who feel like accountability for your abuser just isn't within reach, maybe now or ever, but you want to do something to help protect kids in the future from going through what you went through. In this episode, Terri offers a few examples of how to educate yourself, how to educate people in your life, and as a survivor, how to maybe even get involved with advocacy. As a nonprofit, Sesame can actually lobby to its legislators, and so they need survivors and voices, survivor stories to actually get them in the door to talk to people who can help change law. So maybe that could be you. Okay, lots to get into. Here we go.
Hello.
Hi, Terri. Oh, I love that pink sweater.
My signature color. This is my favorite color.
I have come to embrace the color pink in my 30s because when I was a kid, I was very much like, I don't like pink. It's too girly. It was a lot of like internalized misogyny. I'm not one of those girls. But now I love the color pink.
There's there really is something about being in the pink.
But it's true. I feel like when you're a little kid, it can be so like vilified, that it's like, ooh, you don't want to be one of those girls, like girly girl.
Yeah. If you were angsty goth teens like Sarah and I, that was our vibe. I'm sure there's so many young women out there that are like, I loved the color pink as a teen. Anyway, Terri, thank you so much for being on the show. We are so excited to talk to you today. You have quite a story and quite a long spanning journey of your advocacy work. And there is a great episode of the NC Sesame podcast, Crossing the Line, the NC Sesame podcast, where you go into depth about that, about your journey. So I'm going to do, excuse me, I'm going to do my best to do just a quick recap of that. And listeners, please go check out that episode of Crossing the Line, the NC Sesame podcast, where Joelle, the host, has a conversation with Terri about her story and her journey. But today, like I said, I'm going to do just a quick recap, and then we really want to talk about your experience with almost 40 years of advocacy work. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, over 40. Yeah.
That 40, is incredible.
43.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So listeners, imagine, if you will, the 80s. Terri, you had just moved to a small town in Nevada, in between Las Vegas and Death Valley, and in the 80s, and you had just had your third child, if I remember correctly, and so you were part of an aerobics class, and eventually the teacher, the instructor for that class, told you or asked you if you would take over for her class because she was leaving town because she caught her husband in bed with a high school student. And so at this point, you had 3 kids and you were thinking, I'm going to raise these kids in this small town, and eventually my kids are going to go to school with this teacher that is clearly abusing his position of power, his position as a teacher. And so the next day, you call the principal with your concerns, and the principal tells you that without a victim, that there's nothing that they could do. And eventually, the girl who that this teacher, your former aerobics instructor's husband, a student that he abused, she became pregnant, and eventually she joined your aerobics class that you took over, and she started telling you what she went through, and she started telling you other details. And so what you decided to do after that was immerse yourself in the community and make so much noise and talk to anyone who would listen about this problem. And all of them kept telling you the same thing, that without a victim coming forward, there's nothing that can be done. So now we're in the 90s, early 90s, and you are subbing for at a middle school, and you come across this newsletter where you learn about Title IX. And it's the first time you're really learning about the fact that students have educational rights. And you reach out to the author of the article that you're reading in this newsletter, Mary Jo McGrath, and she educates you a little bit more about Title IX. You had learned that if you ask for an investigation by law, that they must investigate. And that led, so you filed a complaint, or you filed for Title IX, and that led to 35 students coming forward. But none of them, understandably, wanted to admit or testify that he had raped them. So what happened was that the school board suspended him for 5 days, and then he threatened to sue them if they didn't take this off his record. Eventually, they settled. And then this fucking guy decided to run for the school board. And you were like, oh, hell to the no. I've had enough. And you took matters into your own hands, Terri, and you decided, I need to find these victims. I need to try to work with them to hold this guy accountable. Eventually, you did find one of those victims, and eventually he was charged with 5 years. And he is also on the National Sex Offender Registry. And then all of that led to your work with Sesame and the work that you're doing now, because, and I love that you said this in that interview with Joelle, that you wanted to help parents navigate the treacherous waters of this whole thing because you had some experience and you were able to help them along. And I know that that's the reason why Sarah and I are doing this podcast, is because we feel similarly. Like, we went through few years of trying to navigate the legal system and trying to work with all the right groups and entities, and then deciding, like, we got to try something new. We got to pivot a little bit. So how did I do, Terri, in a nutshell?
You did great. Just to clarify a couple of things.
Okay.
When the girl that he had impregnated started attending the aerobics class, she never told me anything. She was still with him. She was going in the midst of being engaged to him and marrying him. So she wasn't telling me anything. But when she showed up to the aerobics class, everyone else in the class was giving me an earful of, things they had experienced as high school students, or things that they were experiencing as high school students currently. And then parents, were also, telling me, what they had tried to do in years past. So I was getting, all of this information from all of these, women in the community. The other thing is that he was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison in 1996. And he served a total of 16 years. He was paroled in 2012. And he's a lifetime registered sex offender supervised, and he has violated his parole 3 times since being released and has been reincarcerated for, periods of time. I believe it was in 2024 that he was released after serving 2 more years for a parole violation. I'm on the list that they notify every time, something comes up with his, parole. And every time he came up for hearings to be paroled, even prior to his release in 2012, I was notified. And so I had the opportunity to write to the parole board as to why I felt he should be kept locked up. So I did. So I've got a stack of letters from them and my responses back to the parole board like this. I really kept abreast of what was going on with him. Will still do. So if if he violates again and I'm notified, I'll be writing another letter.
Well, that's awesome though. I mean, I think it's interesting that somebody gets to be on that list that wasn't just the victim, right?
Right.
Because I feel like when you hear about this list, you often think about only it's the victim or maybe the victim's family that gets to be on that list. So I think it's impressive that, that's a little bit broader and it gets to be people that were like, I was part of the community that helped have this person like held accountable and also like advocated with other survivors to really like organize coming forward against this guy. I think it's really
Right.
interesting, Terri, that you mentioned that when you were in this aerobics class, that it was the women in the community that were saying these things to you, because I feel like I've been talking about this a lot lately with the women in my life of it is the women, right? That usually
Right.
hold, not only are the victims, but are holding these stories and are speaking up and are trying to do something, right? And unfortunately, it's not often the men in the community. So I just thought that was really interesting that you were
Right.
saying like it was this group of women that were like, this guy is a fucking problem, and we all
Yeah.
know this. And I think there's
Yeah.
real power when women can
Mhm.
come together like that.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
something that I noticed that you said in the interview on the Crossing the Line NC Sesame podcast when you were talking with Joelle is part of your advocacy journey involved becoming part of the community. Like I really like that you made a point to say that was part of this because, and I mean, I'm just going to ask before I put words in your mouth. I'm thinking it was because you realized you needed a community. But Terri, can you talk a little bit about why, for anyone maybe that wants to make change, why it is important to become part of the community and what that really means?
Well, it was a very small community, first of all. This little town, when we moved there, and I think we actually, tipped the scale to bring the population to 4,000. So,
It's small. I'm sure
it's
Sarah can relate.
very small in the middle of the desert. Beautiful valley, but the things happening on the ground, as beautiful as the valley was, the things happening on the ground were very ugly. I got very involved in my church, and being a very small community, I'm a piano teacher, and music has always been, at the top of my life, the umbrella to my life. And so I immediately got involved in church. I became a soloist at church, and then when they developed, the choir, I was in the choir, and then there was a women's music ministry, and we had a band, and I was a part of that. And in so doing, one of the members of, the choir was, the wife of a deputy prosecutor. So I became very close with that family. And then there were others that were deputy sheriffs. And so I became familiar with the sheriff's department people and the sheriff himself, the elected official, the elected district attorney, and so his wife and his little twin daughters were, part of the ballet studio, and I was teaching ballet at the time as well. And so, I became familiar in all of these different situations with the community officials and the county officials. So I'm having conversations with them, about why they can't open an investigation, why they can't set up a sting operation, why can't they catch him in the act. We all have eyes and ears, and if I'm hearing it all, certainly you are too.
Yeah, that's such a big part of it, right? Is, Diana and I talked about that a lot with our experiences. Is like all the kids knew. Not all the
Yeah,
kids, but a lot of the students knew, right? I
yeah,
was surprised actually when I went back and reached out to some of my former classmates that some of them were like, "What?" And I'm like, "What? How have you not heard about this in the last 20 years?" Okay.
yeah,
But a lot of times the students know, and I'm sorry if a bunch of kids know, you can't tell me there's not a single adult that doesn't know. And to your point,
right.
like you're not even in the if you're not even in the school and you're hearing about it, somebody in a point of authority in that situation knows what is going on.
That investigator that did the Title IX investigation was a private investigator they had sent down from Reno. And they sent him to me, believe it or not. They sent him directly to me to give him the leads to start his investigation. Now, I had 4 names on either a bridal or baby shower napkin because this conversation was happening, all the time about Peterson and his, at the time we called them dalliances with students. So even in those types of settings, I was still learning more about Joseph
Mhm.
Peterson. So I jotted down these 4 names that came up in that conversation of girls that had attended the high school in the 70s, in the early 80s, that were potential victims. And I held on to that napkin until until 19 well, this investigation started in 1993. So here we are 10 years later from my making that first report to the principal, that we're still dealing with Peterson's sexual misconduct against students.
But I think that's such a great example. Like, right, you're like at a baby shower. Like, I mean, I feel it goes back to like the idea of, you know, kind of how like feminism, different feminism waves have like crumbled because of like inner fighting, right? Like, first wave was only for white women, second wave was only for straight women. All these things that kind of like fractions and kind of keeps women away from each other
Mm-hmm.
helps the system, right? Like if
Right.
we are all fighting with each other and we are all in silos, you are preventing those situations that you're talking about exactly, Terri, where women are in those spaces together and they are sharing their experiences and their traumas. And then there's badasses like you that's like, let me get a pen and paper. Like, I'm going to take some notes. Like,
Give me a
I don't
napkin.
know. I think, especially now with everything that's happening in our country, I think it's like such an important reminder of
Yeah.
like, this is why community is important and why it is important for people to like come together and share their experiences because there is power, obviously. Like if you
Right.
hadn't been in aerobics class, if you hadn't been a parent who gave a shit about your school district, like how much wouldn't have happened. Like not only this guy wouldn't have been held accountable, but like your whole life's work that you've been doing.
There's a great speaker named Jackson Katz, who is the biggest feminist, male feminist in the country, I think. But he started these trainings on training men to be responsible for men, and that the fact that women were being trained on how not to get raped,
Mm,
men have not been trained on how not to rape women.
yeah.
That's yeah, the important part of it. The most important part, I would
Yeah.
say.
This is the missing link in training in our
Mhm.
schools. We started out training children, the 5-year olds, good touch, good secret, bad secret. Tell until someone believes you. And here is your circle of safe people to tell. Number one is the parents. Number two is the teachers. So when these children are being offended by a teacher and the teacher has already been identified as their safe person to tell, who do I go to now?
Exactly. Yeah.
You see, so
Yeah.
the initial child abuse prevention training for children skewed their perception of how to make a proper report, and that even a safe person in your circle of people to tell can also be a dangerous person, and that was not the message being given to them. So that was a problem. The next thing was that putting the onerous just on children to report when something bad was happening to them.
Yeah, because
So
they're not, children are the victims. They're not likely to
children are the
report.
victims. And what is the responsibility of adults? Their first responsibility in any child youth serving institution is duty of care, right? They must first
Yeah.
take care of those children in order for those children to be able to excel in whatever the program is teaching them. Early 2000s is when we started to bring in bystander training, to train the adults around the children to recognize the warning signs that a child may be being abused, and then to intervene and make proper mandatory reports under mandatory reporting laws.
Yeah, I think that's such an important part of it, right? Is like, Diana and I've talked about it a lot of, I think a lot of the trainings that we see now in school districts are also very much geared towards, at least in my opinion at least, is it comes off very much like, well, obviously you're not going to do this. Like, you're not a pedophile. You're not a creep. You're not going to do this. But someone could accuse you of it and you could lose your job, right? Or if you make an accusation against your coworker or your friend, they could lose their whole career. Instead of the messaging being, you could be in a position to prevent a child from being abused. You could help save this kid's life. Like, you as a bystander could literally be the deciding factor between the two completely different outcomes for this child's life. And I think that is super important, like you're saying, Terri, and that training of that bystander. Like, you can't train, if someone is going to like assault a kid, they're going to assault a kid. You can't like train that out of somebody. You can't be like,
Right.
oh geez, if no one had told me I can't have sex with a student, geez, I would have just gone and done it. But thank goodness I had this training and they told me not to. Like, if you're a piece of shit, you're going to go down that path. But it is about all the people around those people that enable the behavior, turn a blind eye, you know, pick the opinion of an adult over a minor, like that, all that stuff really is huge.
Yeah.
So where do you feel like we're at now, right? On the training front, like, you, from all the years that you have been
Yeah.
like doing this advocacy work, like, how far do you think we've come?
Oh, I wish I could say exponentially, improved,
Yeah.
but sadly I can't. Sadly I can't. The same things are still happening. The same pass and deference to offenders is still being prioritized rather than the safety of children. Case in point, I just spoke with a reporter last week about a case in Wisconsin where a principal has been arrested and charged with failure to make a mandatory report. This is so extremely rare, but his excuses for not making a report, and this was in a Christian school, I think it was a Lutheran private school, high school. His excuses were, well, he's a good Christian man. I just didn't think, I know him, and so the victims were not believed. And this guy gave deference to his colleague, that's a good Christian man. That was his reasoning for not reporting properly to law enforcement. And this is the attitude that still exists, right, in every school. Here in Las Vegas, there was another teacher arrested in the news last night.
Wow.
I think that's number 12 this school year.
Yikes.
Wow.
Here, in one school district, in one area, in
In
Las
the
Vegas,
small,
of
yeah.
that school district.
Wow.
I think it's ego though, right? Like no one wants to believe that a
Yeah.
person that they like can do something so terrible. And so you start to justify away the behavior and you start to
Right,
not let yourself believe it because what does that mean about me? What does that mean
right,
about me as a person if I'm friends with a child sexual molester? Like that,
right.
and so unfortunately, I think that ego really gets in a lot of people's way. But I think that's an amazing, step in the right direction to be holding mandatory reporters accountable because
Right,
there's that other piece of it is, sometimes this legislation gets passed and there's policies in different school districts. But if you're not following through with it, if there aren't ramifications, if there aren't consequences, just
right,
like the Epstein files not getting released, there's no
right,
consequences for them not releasing the Epstein files, which should have happened a month ago. They're not going to
right,
do it. So, like,
right,
unfortunately, you need these cases like the one in Wisconsin where something is happening.
right.
And it sucks for people like the three of us that's like, well, your moral core should be telling you to do this.
I was just going to say that, Sarah,
Yeah,
because you were just talking about how, the bystander, it's great that now we have moved the focus, like the training focus is no longer kids. It is your responsibility to
right,
say something and to resist and whatever else. Okay. So now we have this bystander training. And yes,
right,
it would be great if people just would do it, right? If they actually fulfilled their oath or their duty, whatever, to do no harm and to take care of kids.
right,
But that's not happening, obviously. So unfortunately, you need more
right,
intense ramifications, some consequences. And
right,
I think yes, that is huge. That is huge that a principal, like a staff member, someone who is not the
right,
abuser per se,
right.
is being held to account. Terry, do you think
Mhm.
that would happen in a public school? Like, is the fact that it was in a Christian school,
Well,
does that make it easier, so to speak?
no, no. The fact that it was a parochial school, as opposed to a public school, it's rare in any case. And the reason for that is that the statute of limitations on average nationwide for failure to make a mandatory report of child abuse and neglect is 1 year from the time they failed to make the report. The penalty on average nationwide is a misdemeanor, 6 months in jail or $1,000 fine. So
$1,000? That's
yeah,
not a
so
lot of
there,
money.
no, it's the equivalent to a traffic ticket, really.
Wow.
Uh, uh, so
Gosh.
first of all, the statute is way too short because we know that it takes years for survivors to come forward, and sometimes decades. In fact, most of the time, decades. So it's really too late for prosecutors to prosecute for failure to report. The other thing is that prosecutors have limited resources, so they're not going to, spend their resources prosecuting these very minor
Big quotes, air quotes, minor.
Big
Yeah.
air quotes.
offenses, and so they don't get prosecuted for that reason as well. Yeah, so that's really the biggest obstacle to holding enablers, because that's what they are, accountable. And so what we need is criminal statutes that criminalize enabling and make that a felony offense with harsh penalties so that they have they are more motivated to make a proper report when they suspect abuse and not have, substantiated abuse. It's not their job to substantiate it.
Right.
It's their job to report suspicion. Suspicion. And so when they get a report from either a student or another faculty member or a parent that says this person did this to my child or this person did this to this student, they need to pick up the phone and call the proper authorities listed in the law enforcement and or child protective services, and make that mandatory report so that the proper investigators can come in and investigate, and the victim services can kick in for the victims so that they can start receiving services right away in the course of the investigation being done. And then victim services and victim advocates from the prosecutor's office can do their job to walk that victim through that justice journey, because it is treacherous.
It is. I think so. I've got a couple of questions based off of what you just said. So, hold on, my brain just turned off. Can it turn back on?
Click.
Yes. Okay. So it worked. Sorry. Yeah. So I think it is really important, that clarification of it is not the school district's job to substantiate the abuse, because I think in Diana's case we saw a lot of that, right? Where it was like up to the discretion of the administration at the school districts, where it's like, well, we didn't think it was worthy of anything, so we didn't do anything. And it's like, it's not your job. You're not a detective. You are not an investigator. You are a school administrator who's trying to balance 1,000 plates. This is not up to you. And I've heard from parents that are current parents at school districts all over the place, that have concerns about an employee at the school that their kid might be going to, and have taken it to, administration, and they've been told, well, if the kid's not saying it, if the victim isn't the one making the accusation and the teacher or employee isn't admitting to it, which who the hell would, then we can't do anything about it. And that's always been really confusing to me, because it's like, is that their right to make that determination, or should that still be going on to someone outside of the school district?
It's not their right and not their job. Not their right and not their job. It's not their right to interrogate a victim, right? To get them to say what they want that victim to say, which is nothing happened. Yeah. That's what they want to hear.
To state law then, though, like, I guess you don't have to know the answer to this, but I've always just been interested, like, say I'm a parent, it's not my kid, but my kid's coming home and saying, hey, at volleyball practice, all the girls were talking, just like you experienced, Terri, all the girls were talking about how this teacher is texting them, or he's saying weird stuff to them. And I come forward as a parent and I say, hey, I'm hearing from my kid that she's hearing other kids. I understand this is like third person at this point, but this is a concern. Does the school then have to report that, or is that
wouldn't that be Title IX?
Law? I don't know. That's
like, could
question,
you do a Title IX report?
That behavior is a violation of Title IX. So yes, it is a complaint that a parent in that situation whose child is experiencing and witnessing sexual harassment, because that is prohibited by Title IX, and they have a right to file a formal complaint to notify the school under Title IX that this person is doing this, and this, and all of these behaviors, I fear, are going to lead to this. And possibly this is happening, and we need to find out, and those children need to be questioned as to what they're experiencing. There have been actual cases like this where an entire team had made numerous complaints, different complaints about, what their coach was doing. I mean, just look up coaches arrested and you will find, tons of cases like that. But yes, and again, this goes back to schools not doing their due diligence as they're mandated to do under Title IX to train students, faculty, parents, both verbally and in writing annually on how to make a proper Title IX report. What is a violation of Title IX? What are your child's rights, or what are my rights as a student to an education free from harassment, discrimination, sexual misconduct, and conducive to learning? That is my right, but no one knows it. No one knows it, and no one knows what to do it. This is the protocol. This is the fire drill information that they're supposed to be getting every year so that everybody does know what to do when these situations arise.
So Terri, tell us, or tell our listeners, I guess I'm a trick. Tell our listeners, obviously, like, be involved, be a part of your community. I think it's super interesting to know that, like, they can also file a Title 19 or Title
Yeah.
9 like claim for somebody else. I think is really important to know. But
Right.
like, if you were to give somebody advice as part of like trying to be a diligent community member around this subject matter, like, is there specific training for just your average person, or literature, or podcasts, that you would like really think would be helpful for people to get educated about
Right.
their rights and like how to help protect other kids?
Right. Well, first of all, as a community member, every member is responsible for the safety of children. If you're a neighbor and you see abuse happening in the front yard of your neighbor's house, where a child is getting beaten, by their parent or a babysitter or any other family member, um, you have a duty to make a report, about what you witnessed, so that that child can be protected and safeguarded from that abuse. You have the power to make it stop for that child, even though it's a very hard thing to put a family through. Isn't it worth it to spare a child that kind of abuse? That's the ultimate goal, is to save a child. And then, as far as Title IX is concerned, understanding mandatory reporting, understanding children's rights, these are all very important things to know. Just intervene when you can. It's the best thing you can do for a child. Just stand up and say, no more, no more. You don't deserve this, little girl. You don't deserve this, little boy, teenager. um, and I'm going to put myself between you and the predator. And that's really what it boils down to.
Oh,
Um,
Terri, you're gonna make me cry.
I know, for real.
I
But
feel like
it's so
I just
true.
it is, and I feel like especially right now, like, there is so much horrible stuff going on in our country right now that is impacting children, and the Epstein file, like, I just feel like on a cultural level, like, we are not protecting children, and it is so hard to
Mm-mm.
watch how like the quiet part is being said out loud now, right? That it's like these people were trafficking and raping little kids, nobody cares, and now we've got children being snatched up by armed forces and used as bait to try to lure their own families out and put in detention centers, and we're not doing
uh,
anything. Like, it's heartbreaking. And so
right,
I think it is just like a good reminder of like, I can't do anything to stop these giant systems on my own, but like collectively we all have the power, and at the end of the day, all of our moral compasses should be aligning on like, protect kids. That's pretty easy,
right.
right? Like,
Yeah,
they shouldn't be beaten, they shouldn't be snatched up from their homes, they shouldn't be raped and molested. Like, we should all be able to agree on that. And yeah, it just feels like a dark time for kids right now. Like it
Right.
just it does.
It
Thank you.
really is. And so going back to the conversation about training and what is missing, as I mentioned, Jackson Katz teaching men to be good men and teaching men how to not rape women, is important. And that's the missing link in our education systems. We have child abuse prevention training the kids. We have bystander, mandatory training of recognizing grooming behaviors and reporting those. But the missing link is the perpetrator prevention education. And there is only one program that I'm aware of, that does that in schools, for schools. And that is developed by one of our board of advisors, Dr. Glenn Lipson, who is a forensic psychologist. He developed the Making Right Choices training for educators. And it is a perpetrator prevention, how not to cross boundaries, how to self-assess when you are mentally crossing boundaries, and how to avoid and stop yourself from physically crossing a boundary so that you don't become a perpetrator, so that you can spare a child and a student the suffering of becoming a victim of you. So makingrightchoices.com, you can look it up, and I highly recommend a future interview with Dr. Glenn Lipson because
Oh, I'm
he's one
adding
of
it to
the
the list.
finest human beings on earth that I know, and he's filling that gap.
What I just said before, where I was like, you can't train that away, but it is really interesting because, I do think that I can't remember who it was. There was some advocate that I was talking to along the way where, um, her point of view was very much be careful about the way that you talk about these perpetrators on your podcast or whatever that you're doing. And I don't think that we really have been careful because we have a lot of rage and anger and fuck it. But she was like, kind of be careful. Her point of view was be careful not to paint them as purely monstrous people for a couple of reasons. And like
Right.
one is that everybody expects that to then be like a greasy haired, creepy hitchhiker guy under the bridge. Like that's what a bad guy looks like, right? And that's not what these
Yeah.
people look like. They're
No,
community
no.
members. They're dressed professionally. They look like everybody else. And then B, the idea of if you are a person who's crossing those lines, you don't see yourself like that, right? And
No.
so like if you don't have that training that's like here are the lines and you don't even realize you're crossing them, like gift giving, compliments, talking about a kid's clothing or blah 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 blah. All these things that can be fine in certain
Mm-hmm.
situations. And then,
Mm-hmm.
this is when it's not fine. And if that's being left up to the discernment of people who aren't trained,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like how are they supposed to know when they're starting to cross those lines? And I think it's hard for Diana and I as survivors to try to like hold space for that. Like,
Yeah.
the understanding of like, oh no, I raped a minor. Like
Right.
it's hard for us to like get there. But I do think that that can create a boundary where people then are missing a lot of red
Right.
flags,
Right. Right. This is the kind of training that needs to be happening in colleges of education.
Yes.
They
Oh,
this
yes,
is
girl.
this is
If I
the
could
one.
snap, I would, Terri. That's so important.
There we go.
Yes, there has to this should be
You
part of
know,
education training. There should be a
absolutely.
section in in the
Mhm.
ethics class where, because
Right.
this happens, we cannot keep pretending that it's not
Right.
happening. It happens.
Happens a
Right.
lot.
It does happen a lot. It happens a lot.
Yeah.
Every day. I mean, there are 5 million children in our classrooms right now. The 10% of the
Mhm.
50 million children enrolled in our schools nationwide that are right now in the clutches of an educator, school employee, volunteer, coach that are suffering educator sexual misconduct. 5 million. Now, if we had 5 million children that contracted COVID,
Yep.
what would happen?
Yeah, or
What would
meningitis,
happen?
like
Right?
there'd be like a whoa, we need to
Yeah.
do something.
Right? We
Well,
had
you would hope.
we
You
had
would hope.
7 children years and years ago in Fallon, Nevada that contracted leukemia. Now, Fallon, Nevada is where they had the Top Gun school was up in Fallon, Nevada for a while. They also had rocket fuel that was being tested or something or other up there. And they sent a posse from Congress to find out why 7 children had gotten sick with leukemia in this one small community of Nevada. 7. And I'm like, where the hell is the posse for the 5 million
Exactly.
children suffering educator sexual misconduct? Why is there not a congressional hearing and investigations to find out why are these settlement agreements and separation agreements being used to pass predators from one jurisdiction to another? Why aren't adults being trained properly? Why aren't courses including how to protect children from sexual misconduct in schools and how to maintain proper boundaries between students and yourself?
There are so many systems in place that are a part of the problem. Like, the part of the reason it's not getting talked about is because the way that schools are structured in our country is part of the problem, right? And our laws are part of the problem. And so you've got,
Right,
you going back to the Epstein files, like, you've got government that is part of the problem. You've got schools that is part of the problem. You've got organized sports that are part of the problem. You've got the Catholic Church that is part of the problem. Like, there are huge, rich, connected organizations, not to
yeah,
sound like a aluminum foil hat person, but like that are genuinely profiting or saving money by this not becoming a huge problem for
Yeah.
people. Because if
right,
if we all actually were paying attention and gave a shit, that essentially double the population of Chicago worth of children right now in our country are being abused by school employees. That's just school employees. That's not
Mm,
family members. That's not church
right,
officials. Ugh, the number is so much bigger,
that's
right? Like,
yeah.
than what we're talking about right now.
right.
But it will cost them so much money if we actually start doing something about it. And sadly, going back to that case in Wisconsin, that's what makes people give a shit. It's like, it has to have
Yeah.
ramifications for these
Right,
giant organizations and structures.
right, right.
And I think that's what can feel really daunting about it, though, is like when you kind of
Yeah.
start to take that step back. I think that goes
Well,
back to what you're saying, Terry, about like your neighbors and the kids in your life and being that advocate for them and stepping in.
right,
And hopefully,
right.
as we all keep doing that, eventually the
Yeah.
tide will start to turn.
Yeah. When I think back on what I did and what I still do, it just shouldn't have been that hard.
Mm,
It shouldn't have taken a decade,
yeah.
to get something done about him.
Terri, can you share a little bit more about the current work that Sesame is doing? What are
Yes.
some things that Sesame is doing? How can people support? How can our listeners get involved
Oh,
or support
wonderful.
the work that you're doing?
Well, we still advocate. Our number one priority is advocating and supporting victims, families, survivors, that are coming forward for the first time in their life or seeking justice in some form or fashion, helping to support them and giving them guidance on what their options might be and who to go to get done what they want to do. And then the other is policy training. We also have endorse different training programs for educators on our website, but policy primarily to stop this practice of passing the trash. One perpetrator will work in a minimum of 3 school employment settings before they're ever reported and stopped. One
Wow.
perpetrator can have as many as 73 victims in their lifetime, and it's because they aren't stopped. They are enabled by these
Mhm.
separation agreements that help them get away and find more victims. And so we are bent on, stopping that practice. And we've done a pretty good job so far. We supported legislation in Pennsylvania between 2011 and 14 to stop this practice of passing the trash, to identify those who are applying to schools, to identify whether or not they have an offending history, because 95% of these cases are handled in-house and not reported to law enforcement as they lawfully should be. They don't have a criminal history. So fingerprint background checks are a false sense of security. We have to find out and vet applicants to schools to determine whether or not they have had an offending history so that they can't be hired. And so because we worked so long with Senator Anthony Hardy Williams in Pennsylvania to get that legislation passed, he ended up naming it after our organization. So it is now known as the Sesame Act. Many other states have adopted it. Connecticut was the first. They had a huge scandal in Stamford, Connecticut, and because of that, we were contacted and asked what we can do, and quickly introduced them to the Sesame Act, and they got theirs passed in 1 year. And then my state of Nevada, we got it passed here in 2017. New Jersey also came on board in 2018. Maryland, Illinois now has it as part of Faith's Law in Illinois. Colorado has recently come on board, and so has California. So we're making headway. It is considered. We also supported the federal legislation under the Every Student Succeeds Act that mandates states stop this practice by banning the use of all of these agreements that allow them to get away and conceal their misconduct. So states are mandated but federally to stop this practice in that way, and the U.S. Department of Education has deemed the Sesame Act as the model legislation for states to adopt in fulfillment of the federal mandate. So that's huge. Progress is slow, though. States have been very slow to comply with that mandate, but we're doing our best, to help those that come to us for support. Because we're a nonprofit, we cannot reach out to legislators ourselves to ask them to enact the Sesame Act. So we have to wait until, a survivor goes to a legislator and says, hey, there's this legislation out there. I want to introduce you to this great organization that's behind it. And so then we can jump in and support all the way, but we can't lobby for the legislation ourselves.
But we could, or our listeners could.
Yes, you could. And I don't believe that Iowa
I'm sure it doesn't.
has the language yet. Yet.
Yeah, send me the information, Terri. I would love to pick a couple legislators' ears about it.
Yes. ncsesame.org, Sesame Act Toolkit page.
Okay. Oh, look at you are ready with that one, Terri. I love it. Well, it sounds like you and Sesame are doing quite a lot. And you also, Sesame tracks, or there's a Google alert that you have set, right? Because as the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education does not collect this information as far as how many school teachers are. I'll let you explain it. What is this?
The Department of Education does not track educator sexual misconduct through data. They were supposed to. When the original No Child Left Behind was enacted, there was this little tiny portion that called for a new study of educator sexual misconduct and new data to be collected. But They watered it down when they asked Dr. Cheryl Shakeshaft, who's also on our board of advisors, one of our longest serving informal and formal advisors to Sesame, to do the research. They watered it down and only allowed her to do a synthesis of existing research and data. And because what that would have meant they had to do was to put in place reporting protocols from every state. So every state would have to instruct their districts to gather, keep track of the cases within their district, report it to their state, and then each state Department of Education would have to report up to the chain of command at the U.S. Department of Education. They didn't want to do that because if the data exists, the problem exists, and they would have to do something about it.
That's
so
right.
they don't want the data to exist. And they still don't want the data to exist because even in their current civil rights data collection project, they, after my conversations with the Department of Ed to let them know that they're not collecting data, even though they were collecting data on student-to-student sexual harassment and sexual violence, they weren't collecting data on adult to student. So they did put some questions in there, but they made them optional to answer. So they still don't want to know. So that's a huge problem. So Sesame, when we were working with Senator Toomey's office on this federal legislation, we set up at that time a Google alert on teacher arrests and educator sexual misconduct. And so we started gathering data on teacher arrests, and Senator Toomey used this data in his speeches on the Senate floor several times. And so we've been collecting Google alerts on teacher arrests since 2014. And our one of our board of directors, Dr. Billy Joe Grant, who's a research and evaluation expert, has that data. And she can extrapolate this information from every state. So when we're talking to legislators and they want to know specifically the numbers from their own state, within less than 5 minutes, Dr. Grant can extrapolate that state's arrest data, and we can use that, in support of trying to get legislation passed.
And that is huge
Yeah.
because I think we've heard a lot, times people say it's not that big of a problem, or, if you can't quantify it, it's hard for people to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Well, Terri, I think my last question for you is going to be, how do you balance this out? Right? Like, this is heavy stuff that you're doing, heavy work, you're having heavy conversations with people. It's trauma a lot. It's, how do you balance that out? Like, where are you finding joy? What do you do to like disconnect and refill your cup? Like, we all got to take a break sometimes. So like, how does Terri Miller balance and refill her cup?
Yeah. What's kept you going for 40 plus years in this really hard work?
Well, like I said, music is my umbrella. I am a piano teacher. I am going into my 26th year of teaching piano. My studio is Make a Joyful Noise Piano Studio. I have currently 37 students I teach every week. It's all about making those wonderful, beautiful noises and filling lives with music, enriching lives through music. And that is my joy. And then I've got this new puppy that's a year old.
Oh, yes. How could we forget?
Handsome angel that brings me joy every day. Thank you, baby. Oh, I know it. I love
Isn't that
you too.
cute? The little bow. Terri, I love that your music program is called Make a Joyful Noise, because you made some noise. You've been making noise, and people have been forced to listen to you, and that's how change has been made. So I don't know if that was intentional, but it is such an appropriate name for the lessons.
Yeah. And here's another fun thing. I was born in the year of the dog. I am a Gemini.
Okay.
And when I am teaching piano, I am a Fifi. But when I am doing my Sesame work, I am a Fido. So
I got
I
it.
am a true gem. And my name, Terri, is the predecessor to all of this. Sometimes I am Terri-fic, but to those when I'm doing my sesame work that are on the other side, I am Terri Bull. And they are
Oh.
terrified, but I love to welcome you to my territory.
I love it. Oh my God. Tara, I need a t-shirt with all of that with your face and your dog's face.
Oh, Terri, you're such a delight. Well, we're so happy that you came on the podcast and you talked to us and we got to see your cute little puppy baby.
Yes, look at that.
And we're just so in awe of you and the fact that you've been doing this work and you're still doing this work. You know, we're like advocate babies. We've only been involved in this world for a few years. So it's really inspiring to meet people like you and talk to you and get to call you a friend, that, you know, just these badass people that are doing really important work and still filling your cup and filling other people's cups. And yeah, we just wish the best for you and we really appreciate you being on the pod.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you too as well. You are phoenixes and you are warriors, and it's our voices together that are going to bring the change that we hope for. So let's do it. Mhm.
Beautifully said.
Thanks for coming on, and hopefully we'll be chatting soon.
All right.
Keep us in the loop on what's going on with Sesame, and we'll be sure to share that with our listeners.
Will do.
Wow, that woman has really lived quite a life. She has done so much. She has really she's done all the things that we've talked about, right? Like, she was a squeaky wheel. She was someone who kept following up. She was someone who wasn't like, I did the bare minimum and I'm done with this. So
Yep.
hopefully our listeners enjoyed that conversation.
Terri is a force of nature, man. She is something else. She is an impressive person. And I think it's also, you know, impressive when people continue doing the work even when the work isn't progressing as quickly as they'd want it to, right? I think it's so easy to get discouraged and feel like, well, I didn't change the world in a year and a half, so I'm going to give up on this. I think it's impressive to see somebody
Yeah.
who's been doing advocacy longer than I've been alive, longer than you've been alive. I think longer than
Mhm.
Carl's been alive. Like, yeah, it's crazy to think about. Like, she's been doing this for a very long time, and it gives hope. I think that we can all do hard work for a long time, right? And you don't have to do all of it, but you can take a little scoop and do your part.
Yeah, it took 10 years for that teacher to get any charges pressed. And
That's
yeah,
insane.
she didn't give up and used all her resources, her connections. Yeah, I think nowadays it's so easy to isolate. I read this great article in The Atlantic called, I don't remember. I'll cite it later. But it's an article about how just because of TV is really what started it. TV gave people an excuse to stay in, and now everything is just convenient. Like, everything you can just get delivery, everything's on your phone, and there's less of that neighborly feel. Like, people don't know their neighbors anymore. And I really think it's not as easy as it used to be. Like, I feel like you kind of have
Yeah.
to put in a little bit of effort to get to know your neighbors and to be a member in your community. But that's so important, because
Yeah.
you are living in a community, whether you are involved or not. There are laws being passed, there's policy being passed, there's state and local ordinances. And if you're not aware of any of it, you're just kind of letting it happen.
Yeah,
So
I don't really
yeah.
have any space for that anymore. Like, the whole like, "Well, I don't follow politics," and it's like, it's not a acceptable answer anymore. Yeah, I think it's a good reminder from Terri of like, keep on keeping on, find your community, protect kids in any situation that you can, you know, stay fucking loud, stay salty, cuddle a dog. I think those are good suggestions from Terri.
Mhm. And suggestion from us, listener, this is my thinking putty that I'm using.
Looks like a gummy worm.
Suggestion from us, go forth and grow through
what you go through.
All right, thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.
Okay, bye. We did it.
We did it. But is it more of like
family?
like an explosive, like bubbly, or like a dry, like
I could have asked. I'll do some follow-up. Be like, Diana, I told Diana about your fart. She wants to know if it was wet or dry.
Because it's a different kind of, like, I think if I heard a bubbly one, I'd be like, oh, gross. I hope that person has a change of underwear nearby. But if I heard like a loud, dry one, I think I would just start cracking up.